People in the West look at Chinese children and feel something very close to envy. They see displaying precision, obedience, higher test scores, more competition titles, better piano, better violin, better visible results. On the surface, it looks overwhelming. Chinese children seem to crush Western children in every measurable category. In school, in contests, in performance. Let's pause here for a second. In school, in contests, in performance. How about in reality? I mean, once these children grow up, leave school, stop competing, and no longer have opportunities to perform, then look again at Chinese people as a group. Take the United States, for example. Even there, Chinese people are still only a tiny minority among the core forces across different sectors of society. Is this caused by difficulty integrating? Why is it so hard for Chinese people to integrate? And what exactly is it that they are supposed to integrate into? Because what many people call a prodigy is often not a miracle of human possibility. It is a myth manufactured by pressure, by forced linear growth, and by one of the most persistent modern delusions, the belief that genius can be produced through early pushing and extreme training. And here I need to make a distinction that almost nobody makes clearly enough. People see a child learning ahead of schedule, practicing at unusual intensity, specializing very early, and they immediately think, genius! No, that proves nothing by itself. Because the real question is not whether the child is learning ahead and training hard. The real question is, who wanted it? Was the child made to do it? Or did the child run toward it? Those are not the same thing. A child being forced into early learning and extreme training is not evidence of genius. Very often, it is evidence of parental ambition. A child choosing early learning and extreme training out of genuine obsession, out of unbearable curiosity, out of spontaneous early specialization, that is different. That can be real talent. That can be the beginning of something extraordinary. But that kind of thing is rare. You do not manufacture it on command. You do not engineer it at scale. You do not produce it just because you want to believe your child should be able to reach the highest standard. And this is exactly where so many Chinese parents become tragic. There is this strange confidence, almost a civilizational arrogance. If that is the highest standard, why shouldn't my child be able to reach it? Why not mine? So they take externally imposed early training and extreme repetition, and they try to make it compete with another child's internally driven obsession. That is absurd and sad. Because what they are really doing is using pressure to fight someone else's love, using control to fight someone else's desire, using injected discipline to fight a genuine inner fire. And those are not equal forces. When a child drives his own early specialization, what you are looking at is not just effort. You are looking at appetite. You're looking at willingness. You're looking at a person who wants more, not less. This is the key. A person who returns voluntarily. A person who rehearses not because the parent is standing there, but because something inside is pulling him back. That is why true prodigy is rare. Not because early performance is rare. Early performance is easy to fake. True prodigy is rare because genuine self-propelled obsession is rare. And that is exactly why it can't be mass-produced. What many adults call giftedness is often just compression, acceleration, childhood turned into output. A child is pushed into one narrow track very early. No randomness, no wandering, no confusion, no waste, no detours, no right to be unfinished. Then adults look at the result and say, incredible, gifted, extraordinary. No, what you are often seeing is not greatness. You are seeing childhood under pressure. You are seeing a child being made legible to adults. And then comes the part that interests me most. Why do so many of these so-called prodigies stop being prodigies once they grow up? Why does the child who dominated at 10 become ordinary at 25? Why does the early winner so often disappear? People like to say the child lost the motivation, became lazy, failed to keep up. That explanation is shallow. The deeper answer is this: what was being built was never deep ability in the first place. It was often an external maintained performance system. And once the forcing weakens, once the comparison changes, once the environment becomes larger and more complex, the illusion collapses. Because what finally gets exposed is this: the knowledge was forced in, but the ability never formed. And more importantly, the desire never formed. That is why being caught up later is often not some mysterious strategy. It simply means there was nothing more to pour in. The child had already been packed full of knowledge, technique, routines, instructions, corrections, but none of it had turned into living power. There was no inner engine, no independent appetite, no real willingness. That is why the child gets leveled. Not because the world is unfair, not because the talent disappeared, but because you can only pour so much into a person from the outside before you finally hit the wall. And this is exactly why the old story of Shang Zhongyong in Chinese students' textbooks matters so much. People think it is a story about a gifted child who declined. The story is often used to show that natural talent alone is not enough. Without learning, guidance, and long-term growth, early brilliance can fade away. It is not. It is a story about parents. It is a story about adults destroying a child's possibility. Zhongyong, his tragedy had nothing to do with Zhongyong himself. He did not create the conditions around him. He did not design the system. His father did. And what did the father do? He turned the child's talent into immediate utility, into social display, into practical gain, into money. The child was used, circulated, consumed. Zhongyong's poem was never actually preserved in the historical record, which probably suggests that what he had was simply a certain sensitivity to rhyme. Anyway, he had no time left for real learning, real development, real deepening. So tell me this: why is this story in student textbooks instead of parent manuals? Why are children made to read a warning that was actually meant for adults? Why is the burden of interpretation placed on a child when the child was never the cause of the damage? The wound of Zhongyong was not self-inflicted. It was parental, it was structural, it was environmental, and that has not changed. Today's prodigy myth works in a more modern form, but the logic is exactly the same. Parents may not literally parade the child for money. They may do something more socially acceptable. They may parade the child for admissions, for ranking, for reputation, for self-validation, for the fantasy that success can be engineered if pressure begins early enough and the path remains narrow enough. The language has changed. The violence has not. This is the religion underneath so much parenting now. Linear growth, constant upward movement, no regression, no wandering, no wasted years, no darkness, no ambiguity. Every year must outperform the last. Every effort must convert into visible achievement. Every investment must produce proof. It sounds rational. It sounds disciplined. It sounds responsible. It is also one of the fastest ways to destroy a human being's deeper development, because real growth is not linear. Real growth disappears, returns, mutates, breaks, stalls. grows, expands in silence, then reveals itself later in a form nobody could have predicted. Real growth involves confusion. Real growth requires the ability to walk back into the fog after once having clarity. And that is exactly what most early success children lose. They lose the courage to re-enter uncertainty. They become dependent on success, dependent on praise, dependent on being ahead, dependent on certainty. And once a person becomes dependent on certainty, development is already in danger. That is why early advantage is often not a blessing. It is often a trap. Outside of some areas of sports where early physical development can matter a great deal, early superiority in most fields becomes a later obstacle. Why? Because it creates narrowness. It creates over-identification. The child wins through one channel, one method, one structure, one identity. And because that channel worked early, nobody dares to leave it. Nobody dares to dismantle it. Nobody dares to risk becoming bad again. But every serious ability eventually requires exactly that. You must be willing to become lost again. You must be willing to become unstable again. You must be willing to let the old version of your excellence die. That is why so many adults who were impressive children become fragile adults. Their whole inner structure was built around staying ahead, not around growing, around control, not around discovery, around performance, not around transformation. They don't know how to enter a new stage where their old advantages stop working. They can't tolerate the humiliation of starting over. Their identity was built too early and built too tightly. And this is also why someone like Alysa Liu became so loved, not just because she won, not just because she was beautiful on the eyes, but because there was something larger in her career than a mechanical success story. There was self-direction, there was authorship, there was a person there. Even after retiring for 2 years, she returned to the ice and won Olympic gold. That matters. That breaks the linear mythology. That tells us something profound. Even in sports, a few people love to reduce to early training and early results. Greatness does not have to come from robotic continuity. It can come from agency, from inner coherence, from choosing, from returning. That is completely different model of development. Not forced continuity, but living continuity. Not externally imposed progression, but internally sustained power. Not the child being dragged down a narrow tunnel, but the person remaining connected to something alive enough to disappear and come back stronger. And this is what so many parents miss. They think the goal is to keep the child winning. It is not. The goal is to keep the child developing. Those are not the same thing. A child who keeps winning may have stopped developing years ago. A child who looks slower, messier, less impressive, less optimized may actually be building something much more dangerous and much more real. And that is why I love when people say Chinese children are winning and the West should copy this model. Winning what? Childhood, curiosity, the right to non-linear development, the ability to remain alive inside one's own growth. If you produce a child who is unbeatable at 12 and spiritually exhausted at 22, what exactly have you won? This is society worshiping visible performance because visible performance is easier to measure than inner development. This is parent panicking in the face of uncertainty and trying to eliminate mystery from growth. But real development contains mystery. Real ability contains mystery. Real people contain mystery. And the more terrified you are of that, the more likely you are to crush the very thing you claim to be building. So no, I'm not impressed by the myth of the child prodigy. I'm interested in the child who remains alive. I'm interested in the person who can disappear into confusion and come back stronger. I'm interested in the courage to leave the path that once worked. I'm interested in growth that is not linear, not clean, not always visible, not immediately rewarded, because that is where real human power comes from, not from never getting lost, but from being able to enter the fog again and still keep walking.